the big parallels that I find very amusing, maybe it's because I'm a journalist, but I sometimes find the media reaction to what's going on to be just as interesting as what's going on. And I've seen the media go through the same stages in reporting about EVs that they did when reporting about the internet. At first, it was considered a interesting little fad. Oh, look what these some of these techie geeks are doing. This is really neato. And then they went on to the stage of, well, gee, this is neat, but it's never going to amount to anything. I know we've all seen for years until recently all the media reports about electric vehicles and how, oh, but of course they'll never catch on, and the reason they'll never catch on is because they haven't caught on. There's only, 1% of sales, so, it can never amount to anything. Well, believe it or not, there were people saying that about the internet for a long time. I had one quote that sticks in my head was, in the early days of the web, someone was predicting that, this was just when all the big companies were getting on the web. And one writer predicted that most of these corporate websites would be abandoned in a couple of years. It would be, don't need to bother with that. So then the next stage, which happened about the time Tesla reported their first profit, was when all the car magazines got on board. When they started to drive Teslas and get them out on the track, they all pretty much became Tesla enthusiasts. They may still love gas cars, but they understand about Teslas, and they're driving them and they're digging them. But the mainstream press was still, they were writing articles more and more about electric vehicles, but there always had to be a sentence in there, but they're only selling 1%, still good question whether they'll ever catch on. Well, that's changed over the last year or two. I think about the time Tesla became the world's most valuable auto company, most of the media changed their tune, and now it's like, wow, EVs are great. The gas car is dead. We're all going to be driving EVs. And so, same kind of arc of different ways of covering the story that we saw with the internet. And the kind of stock market frenzy that we're seeing now is recapitulating that too. Back in the late 90s, people were writing that investors were throwing money at any company with a website. And now here over the past few months, investors started throwing money at any company that has anything to do with electric vehicles, or even companies that are just talking about producing an electric vehicle. Apple and Dyson, the vacuum cleaner company. Wow, they're going to make EVs. Just was writing the other day about a Chinese phone maker, and they're going to make EVs. There's also apparently a Chinese company that's big in video games, and they're going to start making EVs. So big boom. And a lot of writers are saying that, it's been a boom and a bust. All these startup EV companies, they went through the roof and now they're plummeting. Well, I'm not so sure. I kind of think the real boom hasn't started yet. There's going to be a boom and there's going to be a bust. But I think I think the real boom is just about to get started. And of course, as you all know, Tesla has not been any sort of a boom and bust story at all. It's been more a story of constant, steady progress. And
2008 was right on the cusp of bust, but
it's been on the cusp of bust, 3 times. They had to go through the valley of death 3 separate times, and almost had some near-death experiences. And I think we have to admit that as much of their success is due to brilliant ideas and great talent, there's also been a tremendous slice of luck there. And
Yep.
and what they have done here over the last couple of years, some of the technological innovations that they've been introducing are just they're just coming out so fast you can hardly keep up with them, and a lot of them no one seems to quite realize the significance of them. And I'm always bashing what I call the mainstream media, because I'm a journalist who writes for a trade magazine, and we kind of think of ourselves as, well, we're the insiders, we know what's going on. These people with the national newspapers and the local newspapers, that's the mainstream media. So you know, these are the people that always been saying, oh yeah, Tesla's going to go bankrupt soon. And of course, now with a lot of these technological advances, those writers often tend to miss the significance of it. As many of you may recall, when Tesla had Battery Day a few months ago, we read a bunch of articles in the mainstream press. So what's the big deal? You know, new battery, it's a little bigger than the old battery, no big deal. But those of us who took the time to really read about it, we understood that, as I wrote at the time, the basic message here is the end of the oil age is at hand pretty soon. So let me just mention one. Let me just describe how I got the idea to write the book about Tesla. I was writing about electric vehicles for Charged, and of course we wrote a lot of things about Tesla. And I also started writing for a company called EVNX, or EVNX, which some of you may be familiar with. They're located on the east coast of Florida, and they sell and distribute aftermarket products for Tesla.
Well, Roger was one of our first, on our board of directors.
Okay.
At least we know that. Yeah, we know that.
Sure, you know Roger and Matt, the Pressmans. Yeah.
Right.
And I do a blog for them, which is all about Tesla related topics and other things that are directly or indirectly related to Tesla. And what I'm always looking for, and what I really looked for in writing my book, was the stories, the great stories. I had been writing articles about EVs for a while, and I started thinking about writing a book, and I asked myself, well, what topic should I write about? And the answer was kind of obvious. What do people really want to hear about? What are the most popular stories, and what are people searching for? And it's Tesla, by a long shot, gets much more interest than any other EV topics. And when I started talking to some of the people from Tesla, I was able to interview Mark Tarpenning and Ian Wright and several other former Tesla execs. Also, a guy that some of you may know, David Havasi. He lives in Florida, and he was a big wheel in their marketing operation for several years.
David just joined the club.
Okay, great. Oh, he's
by the
not
way, you're
listening
invited
today.
as well.
Thank you. I'd be honored to join. David's not listening now, is he, or any of the?
Not that I know. I didn't see him register.
Oh, okay, good, because I was just about to tell a little story.
But remember, I should warn you, we're recording.
Oh, okay. Well, all right. I'll keep the real juicy stories for another day then. But what I always ask these folks when I get to talk to somebody that worked for Tesla is, tell me some good stories. Like back in the days of the internet, it was like a Wild West atmosphere, like a let's put on a show atmosphere. Everything had to be improvised. Everything had to be made up from scratch. And that's kind of the way it was in the early days of Tesla. So many people have told me, it was just a fascinating experience to go through. There was no big corporate structure to deal with. Anything that had to be done, you had to figure out how to do it yourself. And there are just so many really entertaining stories. And that's what I really tried to focus on in my book. Because as a journalist, it's all about story. Even though you're writing nonfiction, you still have to try to tell a compelling and entertaining story, if possible, that is going to resonate with people. And so that's what I really tried to capture in my book. And the book is an ebook. It's available on Amazon. And as I said, I have the links to all my media sites in the chat there. Tesla Motors Book, that is my site. And from there, you can find links to the book and some of my recent writings. So another parallel, well, I found some parallels between the development of my book and the history of Tesla. And one of those is that in the early days of Tesla, the founders kind of assumed that once they demonstrated that you can build a great EV that people will want to buy, the big car companies are going to come in and either buy the company or license their technology. And of course, that's the way these Silicon Valley guys think. You know, you develop a great technology and then the big companies come and buy it and you cash out for millions. And they were kind of amazed when that never really happened. The technology licensing happened on a limited scale. Toyota and Daimler both licensed Tesla's battery technology for a short time, but that was kind of a abortive effort. I get the feeling that once Tesla grew to the point that they started seeing the company as a competitor, that's when they ended the collaboration. And by the way, both of those companies made tremendous amounts of money from their investments in Tesla. They bought Tesla stock and then sold it a couple of years later and made a fat profit.
Look how much they would have made if they had held it.
They would have made a lot more, yes. And they might have sold more EVs by now if they had stuck with having a licensing relationship. And we're starting to hear some noises like they might be thinking about that again. A couple of companies, there's some rumors that they're talking with Tesla about maybe licensing some of their technology. So we'll see. But it was funny that kind of the same thing happened with my book. I thought when I wrote my book, which was 6 or 7 years ago, I thought I was amazed that there was no other book out there at the time that was a real history of Tesla. And I thought, well, it won't be too long before one of the biggies is going to publish a real book and about Tesla. And it still hasn't really happened. Ashley Vance wrote a great book, which was a biography of Elon Musk. So that wasn't exactly like my book, because my book is strictly about the history of Tesla. And there's been a number of other Tesla-related books that have come out since then, but I think I may say, without tooting my own horn too much, that mine is still the only one that is really just a straight-ahead history of the company. And another thing, which is a kind of a parallel between my book and Tesla, is that I constantly have to update it. Tesla's always updating their vehicles, and they're always doing something new. There's always some news, so I'm constantly having to update the book. Of course, that's the great thing about an ebook, is I can update it whenever I want. It's just a lot of work. So I've been through 3 major revisions of the book, and I'm continually, going in and changing things, adding little bits, and so I like to think it's fairly up to date. It's up to the middle of 2020, anyway. So that kind of segues into my main topic that I'd like to talk about today, which is what I call Tesla's innovation factory. They just keep coming out with new technologies and new ways of doing things. And Of course, they've done that from the start. A number of things that they did from the beginning were very innovative things: the supercharger network, the direct to consumer sales, the online software updates. But in the past couple of years, they've really started to refine the vehicles themselves and the manufacturing process. As Elon Musk calls it, the machine that makes the machine. They've really been refining that. And just over the past year or two, that string of innovations has just kicked into high gear, and they're just coming out so fast, you just can't keep up with them. And I wrote a little article a little while ago, kind of rebutting some of the articles that have come out lately. A few months ago, there was a kind of a spate of the party's over articles. You know, the Tesla stock was way up around 900, and then it crashed back down, and a lot of people were writing, well, that's it. They've kind of settled down now. It's, you know, the stock's gonna just plod along. And I'm thinking, well, I don't think so, because there's all these new technologies that have all this tremendous potential, and we haven't even begun to see the results of those yet, and we won't see the true effects of them for, you know, a year or 2 years or more into the future. So what I wrote was that Tesla's real product is not just cars. And of course, we read this all the time. Tesla is more than a car company. They are doing solar panels, they're doing battery storage, they're doing all these other things. But Tesla's real product is innovation. It's ideas. They keep coming out with these new innovations and ideas. And as long as they keep coming out with those, I think the party's going to keep going, and the growth potential is unlimited. And some just go over a few of these technological innovations that have come out here fairly recently. One is something they call the octovalve, which is a new type of heater, which they first introduced it on the Model Y, and I believe now they're including it on Model 3. And as many of you probably know, most EVs use what's called a resistance heater, which is very inefficient. It's just like a heating element, you know. As you know, you try to push too much electric current through too small a wire, it gets really hot. And that's just basically what a heating element is. Obviously, a gas car doesn't need that. They take waste heat from the engine to heat the passenger compartment. Gas engines put off a tremendous amount of waste heat. I think something like 60% of the energy in the gasoline is wasted as heat or used to keep you warm on a winter day. EVs don't do that, of course, so they need a heater. And that resistance heater is tremendously inefficient, and that translates directly to shorter range. Now, being in Florida, we may not be as aware of that as some of our northern friends, but the range really takes a big hit on a cold winter's day when you're running the heater. So this octovalve thing is a form of a heat pump. And I will just defer to Elon Musk, who said it is very difficult to explain exactly how it works. But it's a much more efficient sort of a heater, so it's going to save a lot of energy, and you can increase the range. Or you can improve performance in other ways, and I'll get back to that in just a minute. Another innovation that got announced at Battery Day, the new 4680 battery cell, which it's a larger cell. It has greater energy density. As I understand it, the energy density of the cell has been improved only slightly, But the larger size of the cell enables a number of energy saving and money saving innovations. If you have a larger cell, you have fewer cells in the battery pack. And as most of you know, all the cells are connected together. Not only is there an electrical connection, but each of the cells is individually cooled. So you have these coolant lines running past all the cells. There is also a control circuit that monitors each cell to make sure nothing's going wrong. So if you have larger cells and thus fewer cells, it is much simpler and cheaper to hook up all those things. You got less wiring and less, coolant lines and all that stuff. That means greater efficiency and lower costs. What about the mega castings? They're going to cast Teslas just like they cast die-cast little model cars. That's what Elon Musk said. He was looking at some of these Matchbox cars on his desk and thinking, well, gee, that's one die casting. Why can't we die cast the parts of the chassis? And he started looking into it and asking, what's the maximum size that we can cast? And you realized, well, there isn't really a maximum size. It just depends on getting a big enough casting machine. So they've bought these enormous mega casting machines. I don't know if you've seen the videos of them, but they're quite impressive. They're just these huge casting machines. And what they're going to do is cast the entire rear part of the chassis as a single casting. And the way they were doing it, and the way every car company has done it up till now, is that's a whole bunch of pieces that are connected together in various ways. And they have to be connected together in very complex ways. There's a very interesting video of Sandy Munro speaking with Elon Musk, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with Sandy Munro. He's a automotive manufacturing expert. He runs a company that does teardowns. They tear apart cars and see what all the parts are, how much they cost, etc. And he's started doing that with Teslas, and he became a big devotee of Tesla. And his videos are really very well worth watching, because he's not only has this vast technical knowledge, but he's a pretty engaging speaker. He has a very entertaining kind of folksy style. And he did an interview with Elon Musk where they were talking about the new mega castings. So definitely try to look that up and watch that. There's a lot of fascinating stuff there. And one of the interesting things, which I really had no idea, was that when you are putting together components in a car, there's a lot of very complex things you have to think about, because different metals, you can't necessarily just bolt them together. You have different alloys, and when they connect, you can get what's called galvanic corrosion. The metals react and start to degrade. Also, different metals react to temperature changes differently. I forget what the technical term for it was, but they have different coefficients of expansion or something. So you can't necessarily just bolt these two different metals together, because as they get hotter and colder, that may fall apart. So this rear underbody section for a car has all these different parts, all of different alloys, and they're connected together in all these different ways. Some are bolted, some are welded, some use adhesives. As Elon Musk said, it's like a Frankenstein monster of components. So if they can cast that whole part as one big hunk of metal, they get rid of all that stuff. And that means not only getting rid of those components, it means getting rid of the production steps required to put those components together. And this is a real important thing that a lot of people miss about all these innovations, is that every time they simplify a part, they're also simplifying the production line. That means a certain robot or human that was doing a task, they may not need to do that anymore. It means the line can be, smaller, shorter, takes up less space, and all that saves money in the production process. So it's not just about reducing the cost of the components, but about simplifying and reducing the cost of the whole production process. And that's a whole nother area of innovation for Tesla, is their production processes, the various innovations they've made at the gigafactories. And there's even been speculation that other companies might want to license some of the production processes that they use at the gigafactories. And I'll tell you one thing, they are already licensing the term gigafactory. I don't think they licensed it. I think they just stole it, because every company now that's coming out with a new factory, it's a gigafactory. I guess it has to be a large factory to be considered a gigafactory, but it's all, any new large factory is now a gigafactory. So I don't know if they got to pay Tesla $100 every time they do that or what. But back to these mega castings, I think they are going to implement the mega castings at the German gigafactory. I'm not sure. They may already be using them at the Chinese gigafactory. I'm not sure of exactly the timeline, but every time they have an innovation like this, they have to shut down the line and put in the new tooling and all that stuff. So they do it in stages. They do it in the newest factories first, and then later on, when they can take the time to refit the older production lines, they do it, and it kind of works its way backwards through the different Tesla factories. So they've got the rear body casting, and they're working on the front body casting, and they're working on a battery pack that's an integral part of the frame. As you all know, the battery in a Tesla and all modern EVs goes on the bottom of the vehicle, which gives you a whole bunch of advantages. But you still have a floor pan that contains that battery pack, or you have some structural elements, some beams on the sides, and that kind of contain the battery pack. So the latest thinking at Tesla is we'll make the battery pack itself a structural member of the vehicle, vastly simplifying the whole battery pack. It's part of the chassis, and you connect that to the rear underbody casting and the front underbody casting, and now you got basically the whole chassis is just three parts, three great big parts. Much simpler, cheaper. Now, all these innovations, each one is a little bit of an advance. You put them all together and you can see some big savings or some big performance improvements. Because anytime you do a innovation like this, you can implement it in two ways, or you can use it in two different ways. You can use it to improve the performance of the product, or you can use it to reduce the cost of the product. For example, let's say you increase your battery energy density. So if you got a car that has a 250-mile range, now you've improved the battery's energy density, you could increase that range to 300 or 400 miles. Or if you decide that 250 miles was enough range, you can make the battery smaller and get the same range you got before with a smaller battery. So there's a trade-off there. But it's a good trade-off because these are both great benefits for the product. And sometimes you can do both. And that's what we're all used to with computers. they come out with a new generation of computers, it's better and it's cheaper. And that's a pretty strong selling point, you know. Who wouldn't want to buy the new product if you can say, look, it's better in all these ways and it's cheaper? But that was not the case for cars until Tesla came along. You know, what we had was every model year you'd have a few little improvements, and I don't think they ever got cheaper. So all these, when I look at all these innovations that they've come out with just in the last year or two, and again, most of these things have not begun to be implemented yet. There are things that will take a few months or a few years to fully work their way into the production vehicles. And when you put all those things together, a few years down the line, we're going to see, as good as the Tesla vehicles are now, they're going to be a lot better and they're going to be a lot cheaper. And that's something that I think a lot of people in the mainstream press are missing, because they're not used to thinking of cars that way. They're used to thinking of computers that way, but a car that gets so much better and cheaper, that's just that's an irresistible selling point. And so that's why I'm still quite bullish on Tesla. I don't think they've even scratched the surface of what they're capable of doing. I think the sky's the limit, and it's going to be very fascinating to watch. I look forward to writing about all the new stuff they're coming out. So that's my presentation, and hope everybody will immediately go over to teslamotorsbook.com and buy copies of my book for everybody until all your money is gone. And also, Charged magazine is a trade magazine. It's most of our readers there are engineers or people involved in the industry, so that's mostly more technical topics. And then the blog that I write for, EV Annex, is more aimed at Tesla owners. So thanks so much for having me. Thanks to Larry, and thanks to everybody in the club. It's always great to talk to some fellow Tesla enthusiasts.
Thank you. So you always keep hearing about the so-called digital batteries, you know, and everybody says, "Oh, this is going to just put Tesla in the."
Hey, Larry, we can't really hear you.
Sorry. Okay.
The volume's very low.
Okay. Let me see what I can do here. Can you hear me now?
No. It's still low volume.
Really, you're still super quiet.
We must have a problem though. I will have to raise my voice. So I'm asking about the so-called digital batteries. Everybody keeps talking about it. Dyson was talking about it before he folded up his tent. Is there
We can't really hear what you're saying, Larry. There's something wrong with your mic.
Are you? Well, I think I heard you. You were asking about a new type of battery, the one that Dyson was interested in. Are you talking about solid state batteries?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay. Solid state batteries. Yeah. The electrolyte in a battery, which is as most of you probably know, your battery has your anode and your cathode. Those are the two electrodes, and in between those is the electrolyte. And that electrolyte is actually a liquid. It doesn't seem like it. I guess maybe it's more of a paste or something, but to a chemist, it's a liquid. And that, I'm not sure exactly, I can't explain all the technical aspects of it, but that presents some safety issues. It's toxic, it's flammable. So what the battery boffins are working on is solid state batteries, which uses a solid electrolyte. And as I understand it, the big advantage of the solid state batteries is that they're safer. The electrolyte's not flammable, and it has some other advantages also. And there was a company, a startup company called Sacti, that was a big pioneer of solid state batteries. And a couple of years ago, Dyson, the innovative vacuum cleaner manufacturer, I think they bought the company Sacti, or invested a large share in Sacti to get access to their solid state battery technology. And the Dyson EV was going to be based on this solid state battery. But after a few months of development, Dyson couldn't see any path to a viable commercial product, and they abandoned the whole project. And what I am kind of interested to know is what happened to Sakti and their technology, because as I understand it, what they had was something very innovative. It was very far ahead of what anyone else had at the time as far as the solid state batteries. So I don't know what happened to that technology. But I know that solid state batteries are definitely a hot spot. I think, if I'm not mistaken, in that interview that I was speaking about earlier, the talk between Sandy Munro and Elon Musk, they were talking about solid state batteries. No, maybe it was something else. It was definitely one of Sandy Munro's pieces where he was talking about solid state batteries, and he's saying that he thinks within a couple of years they could be seen in production vehicles. So that would be a major advance. Yeah. There's a question here in the chat room. Says, if the battery becomes part of the chassis, how will it be changed if the battery malfunctions or dies? Won't that make the whole car become useless? That's a good question, and I'm sure that's something that they've considered. I'm assuming that the design of this battery would be, the way it's assembled in the car would be such that it's easier to remove it and switch it out. It's not going to be, it's not like a swappable battery, that's a different concept, but I imagine it would be designed in such a way that when and if the battery needs to be replaced, that they can take that chassis apart without too much trouble and put a new structural battery in there. Another question in the chat room, any rumors about EV manufacturers signing agreements with Tesla for use of the supercharger network? That is something that's been talked about for a long time, and I know Elon Musk has said several times that he was open to the idea, but I am not aware of any substantive talks with any other EV makers about doing that. That would be a logical thing to do because by most everybody's account, the superchargers are the gold standard of DC charging. Most people who I've talked to say, those are okay. There's a lot of other DC chargers are becoming more and more common, but the supercharger experience really is the best out there. So rather than reinvent the wheel, it would make sense for some of these other companies, especially some of the startups, to license the supercharger technology, but don't know that there's anything solid on that yet.
Hey, Charles, I don't see anything in the chat. Oh, I just saw something now. You said you put some links in there as well. I wasn't seeing anything or any of the previous questions. I just saw that a question went in there. I don't know if I'm doing something wrong.
Oh,
I'll be republishing them anyway when we publish an article about this. So I think this recording is.
Still can't hear you, Larry.
I think this think this recording will record the links and I will republish them afterwards. Everybody hear that?
We
No.
can't hear you, Larry.
Well,
I can just barely hear you.
yeah. I say I will republish this and the links. Can you hear that?
Okay.
He's going to take care of sending the links out.
Right.
Yeah, I put links to all my media sites in the chat room, and there's 3 or 4 questions here. Someone asked, wouldn't repairs on a casted body be more difficult and possibly cause more accidents to be totaled for this reason? Well, quite possibly. Yeah, I guess one thing about the chassis that are assembled from different components, in an accident, it's possible that only some of the components were damaged and you could replace those. But if something gets smashed and it's a third of the whole car, then yeah, that could be an issue. And unfortunately, as I understand, Teslas tend to be pretty expensive to repair after a collision. For one thing, just because, at least in the case of the Model S and X, there's a lot of aluminum, which tends to be a little more expensive than steel if you have to go to the body shop.
Yeah, Charles, talking about the S, I think that a lot of us are interested in the new S and X and the update. I personally have been waiting for it, and I was a little disappointed. I thought, oh, the new remodel might come with the 4680 battery. It might have a jump from 400 to 500 miles of range or something, and it a little bit feels like, well, there's some cosmetic design changes, and yeah, it's got the heat pump thing and a few little things, but it's not really a major jump. And I was kind of waiting for a year or two for that refresh. And it went from 402 range to 412 range on the refresh. Do you have any insights on where the Model S is going and why that seems to be kind of a small refresh, more cosmetic than it was something big, which is kind of what we were anticipating, or at least some of us were?
Yeah, that's true. The refresh, it seemed like it was mostly the interior that they changed around. And obviously, to make any real big changes, like changing the battery pack or something, that would mean major retooling. They'd have to shut down the production line, and
which is what they did. They've been shut down for 3 months now.
well, yeah, they did.
Couple
They did shut down the line, actually. But I'm sure that the small things that they did were, something they could. It would probably take even longer and be a bigger project to make some major changes. The feeling I get is that Tesla is really pushing the Model 3 and Y now, and that they kind of see the S and the X as, I don't want to say legacy vehicles, but, and of course they have been asked about this and they say, no, the Model S and X are very much part of the lineup going forward. No plans to discontinue them or anything. But I know that the 3 and the Y are bigger selling vehicles for them, and I just kind of get the feeling that that's where they're putting most of their innovation into.
Does anybody else have any further updates on that thing, where the S and X are going? Or
Has anyone driven the new or bought the refreshed S or X?
I haven't even seen one. I don't think any have been delivered yet, have they? I don't know
No.
anybody that's gotten one.
They're not being delivered at this point, apparently.
No.
Yeah, you actually, now that you mention it, I just wrote something the other day. I'm reading and writing this, so much of this stuff I can't remember it all, but they actually didn't deliver any of the S and X in the first quarter. They had shut down the line to do
That's
the
right.
refresh. Yeah, so okay, I guess nobody's driven it yet. They're probably just going to start trickling out pretty soon.
They're trying to sell off current inventory.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
they've sold out all the current inventory.
Well, yeah, I don't think that's true because you can't find an S, even if you want to buy one. They've been gone since the pretty much January 1.
Yeah, there's no S's or X's that Tesla has in their possession. Zero. So the only thing coming forward are the new ones. And to my knowledge, I've got an X on order, and to my knowledge, no one has got an S or an X because it would be all over the internet.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen a thing.
Hey, Charles, just a quick question for you. Great presentation. Just curious from your impression and your experience being in the industry as long as you have, what do you see as being maybe some signals or some indicators that would really help push the electric car future? Is it reliant on fuel prices remaining high? Is it our consciousness about the environment? Is it the savings in the lowering of the cost of an electric vehicle? Is it the subsidy from the administration, from government, allowing a credit? Do you see any sort of factors out there? Is it a combination of all those? What do you see as being maybe that one key indicator that says, man, if we can hit this one mark, then electric cars are going to be everywhere? If you can speak to that. Thank you.
Well, thanks for the question. I don't think the big tipping point is going to be any of those things. I think all of those things are small incremental things that encourage adoption a little bit, But you know what the big turning point is going to be the day that the major automakers stop regarding EVs as an R&D project and start seeing them as a profit center. Because that's the stumbling block all along. The roadblock has not really been a technological thing. It's as I've wrote in back when everybody was talking about Tesla killers, I got a lot of mileage out of the murder mystery metaphor. I was saying, well, if these are killers, they've got the means, but they don't have the motive. The reason the major automakers haven't been selling EVs is because they don't want to sell very many. They want to sell just enough to satisfy the regulators. They want to run some Super Bowl ads with these real flashy EVs that, they want everybody to see the Hummer, even though they're probably only going to sell a couple thousand, It's a question of motivation. And for them to really start selling EVs, and we're starting to see some stirrings of that. We're starting to see just the first signs that VW and maybe GM are going to get serious about actually trying to sell the EVs. And the problem for them is that to do that, they've got to tell their customers, buy an EV, don't buy a gas car. You've got to have the situation where somebody walks onto a dealer's lot looking for a car has got to flip 180 degrees when somebody says, oh, I want a pickup truck. How about that V8 over there? And the salesman has got to say, you don't want that gas pickup truck. You want this electric truck over here. Well, right now, so far, of course, the opposite has been happening. Somebody goes to a Ford or GM dealer and says, oh, have you got any electric cars? The salesman says, well, yeah, but look at this. Here's a car. This gets real good gas mileage, and this is much cheaper. So that's going to be the big tipping point, is when they say, we're going to stop selling the gas cars and start pushing people to EVs. But that's a problem for them, and there's a name for the problem, and it's the title of a famous book called The Innovator's Dilemma. And probably some of you have read this book. It was written some time ago, but it's really quite pertinent across many industries. The people running the big car makers, the legacy car makers, as I call them, they know all the same stuff we know. They're not dumb, and they're not Luddites. They're not opposed to the new technology. It's just they are trying to make the best business decision for them. and they've got all this money invested in gas cars and internal combustion engines. And if they just suddenly stop selling those are all stranded assets. All those lines that they've built and all this research into ever more efficient internal combustion engines, that's all worthless. They don't want to do that. What they want to do, they know they've got to go electric. They know that perfectly well. But what they envision is a long, gradual transition where they just, a very smooth and gradual transition that allows them to squeeze the last bits of profit out of the investments they've already made without having to write off any big stranded assets. Now, I think some of them are going to find out that that's fantasy. That's not going to happen. But again, the big tipping point is when one or more of them decides that it's time to start steering their customers away from their best-selling, most profitable models. And that's tough ask, but it'll happen, but maybe a while.
Well, in the dealer network too, they have so many parts in the combustion engine that they make so much money on the repairs. And with electric cars, the dealers aren't going to make near as much money because there won't be as many repairs to do. And the dealer network throughout the United States, it's so entrenched, it's going to take a long time for them just to give up and, have basically almost maintenance-free cars, safe cars that don't need a lot of work, and they won't make as much money on the parts and, all the repairs and that sort of thing.
And closing 3/4 of it.
It won't allow you to sell, won't let Tesla come into the state. That's another problem.
That's a point, and that translates to the manufacturing too, because getting rid of all those parts and all those repairs, that means lost jobs, and that's a pretty powerful argument, not only for the unions and the people whose jobs are in danger, but for politicians. They it's something I say all the time. I'm all for clean energy and electric vehicles, but we can't abandon those people whose livelihoods are gonna disappear. The companies and governments have got to keep those people in mind, and they've got to make sure that those people are taken care of. It's not only from a moral standpoint, but just from a practical standpoint. You're never going to build support for electrifying if it means all these people are just going to be thrown out of work and ignored.
Yeah, Charles, I think you're making a good point. George made a really good point, because isn't the reality 3/4 of those dealers aren't needed? I mean, all those dealers with 400 cars sitting on the lot, all the cost structure in that, most of that is going to go away. And so your points about how to fund and ease that transition and those jobs and everything is a real complicated part of it.
Yeah, I see the dealerships as kind of a vestige of an earlier era of retailing. When you look at how we buy everything else, it just seems very old-fashioned. But that is a big part of the economy. It represents a lot of jobs. It represents a lot of political power, because the dealers are very powerful, especially at the state level. As anyone who's followed the struggle of Tesla to get permission to sell their cars direct to the consumers knows those dealers are their voices are heard pretty loud. And you have somehow, there has to be a deal reached where they're going to get something out of the deal. They'd have to use a corporate speak term, you got to bring those stakeholders to the table and present them with some sort of a win-win situation.
I think Cadillac let loose a quarter of their dealers, and those who don't adjust to electric vehicles are told goodbye.
Yeah, because Cadillac is supposed to become an electric only brand, as I understand it, or anyway, it's going to be the kind of the one of the forefronts of GM's electrification strategy. And they, yeah, the dealers that didn't want to get on board, they offered them a buyout and gave them some money to just stop selling Cadillacs. But now that probably doesn't mean those dealers are going to shut down, because Cadillac was probably one of several brands. So most of those companies, they're just going to stop selling Cadillacs, but they're probably also selling Chevys and other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I bought my S and my 3 online. I've never bought any car online before. It's a lot of money, but you know, Tesla doesn't have to have a giant car lot of cars everywhere, you know, whereas these dealers, they have to have a lot of space, a lot of cars, and that's a lot of overhead to carry, financing all those cars to stay in the lot. They got to do the turnover. So the dealership situation is going to be very painful, and we do have to provide either training, or you know, these folks can go to jobs or Tesla jobs maybe, or whatever. But it's going to be painful for a lot of folks, I think. But we got to do it over time. Got to do it.
There's an outfit called Plugstar, and one of the guys involved with that is Tom Maloney, the EV journalist that I've known for a long time. And their mission is to kind of break that dealership bottleneck. And his take on it is that it's really a question of education. The dealers don't have anything against electric vehicles per se. It's just that for them, it's so much more work to sell an EV. They have to educate, the sales staff have to be educated about EVs. They have to be able to explain to the customers who are going to have a lot of questions. And so what Plugstar is doing, they're running training programs, and couple of the automakers have partnered with them they go out to dealerships and give a presentation and train the sales staff on how EVs work and how to sell them to people. So I think that's a very positive thing. And by the way, Plugstar also has a consumer-oriented website, which has lots of information for people thinking about buying an EV. Of course, nobody here really needs to see that, because you know what brand of EV you're going to be buying.
Hey, Charles, one comment and one question. I think with regard to the dealerships, yes, there's an education component, but I think until the manufacturers change the compensation plans, or the dealers change the compensation plans for the salespeople, so I spent 20 years in education. No amount of education is going to change if the commission plan incents salespeople to sell gas cars. Until the dealers change that, forget any change. The question for you is, and I apologize, I missed the start of this, so if you already covered this, you can tell me to shut up and go away. Beyond Tesla, which clearly is innovating the hell out of everything, what are you most excited about that's going on, you know, across the rest of the industry?
Well, I'm very excited about what's going on with VW, because, you know, as a journalist who's been covering this area for several years, I feel like I've been fooled so many times. You know, every time an automaker comes out with a new EV, they say, oh, this is it. We're going to sell a lot of these. Everything's going to go electric. I'm like, wow, you know, they're really getting serious here. And then a year later, you read about, well, gee, they only sold 1,000 of them, and then they discontinued them. So I'm skeptical. I'm always skeptical. You know, I've heard this so many times, but maybe I'm getting taken in here, but I believe VW is with what they say, that they really are going to go all electric, and maybe GM too. So that's something I'm very excited about. Another thing.
So, and just following up on that, do you think they understand the magnitude of the problem? Because I saw the VW presentation, and I think the numbers say they're planning something like 240 gigawatt hours of battery capacity, whereas Tesla is something around 3 terawatt hours, so roughly 10 or 12x. Now, clearly Tesla has the energy business that VW doesn't have, but it seems like, you know, although the story sounds good from VW, it doesn't seem like the scale is really there to commit what they need to do if they're going to be serious about this.
Well, that's a good point. You know, we know what they're going to say in their press releases, especially when they're talking to people like me who are interested in EVs. But what you really need to look at is the amount of investment that they've announced. How many dollars have they actually committed to putting into batteries and EV plants? And that is going to give a little better picture of what their true intentions are. I remember a year or two ago, GM and maybe it was Ford, they both made a couple of big pro EV pronouncements. So we're going electric, and somebody pointed out that you looked at the amount of investment they just announced, and that amounted to like about a small percentage of their production. You know, so the investment kind of tells the story. How much money have they committed? Because they can't, you know, in a speech or a press release, they can make it all sound really gee whiz, but they can't fake those numbers. I think once they announce a certain amount of investment, that's what they're gonna put in. I just want to mention one other thing. You asked me what I'm really excited about, and one thing is the commercial EV market, something that doesn't get much coverage in the mainstream press. City buses, delivery vehicles, those are getting ready to go electric in a big way. I've been covering those kind of commercial EVs for many years, and for many years I was frustrated that they weren't catching on faster because the economic justification was there. But I finally realized that what was happening is these fleet operators, the UPS and FedEx and all these companies that operate big fleets, they wanted to do long pilots. They are not going to commit to buying any of those vehicles until they're convinced they're going to work in the real world on the job. And so they wanted to have pilots for years in their fleets using those vehicles. Well, now they've done those pilots. They've got the data, and the economic case has gotten even better. And now we're starting to see some real serious orders, especially buses all around the world. We're seeing cities are buying electric buses. And one big thing we may see here just in the next couple of years is school buses going electric. And there's a couple of good reasons for that. One thing, speaking of stuff I'm excited about, vehicle to grid technology, bidirectional charging, which allows the EV to discharge energy to the grid. You put the energy into the EV battery, and then later you can send it back out. That enables all kinds of wonderful things. And one of those things that it does is it lets fleet owners get some income, because that is a resource that electric utilities can use to balance the demand. They load up the EV batteries during the day when all the solar plants are producing, and then at 5 o'clock when everyone turns on their ACs and it's peak consumption time, then they send that energy out to the grid. Now, when you got a fleet of school buses, it's perfect for that, because school buses sit there, you know, they make their rounds in the morning, then they sit there all day, and then they make their rounds in the evening. And in the summertime here in the US, thousands of those school buses are sitting there idle. And that's a resource that these fleet owners can monetize, and they can get money for that, and that offsets the cost of the buses.
And does that, Charles, does that make sense in terms of the reduction in battery cycles? Because clearly you're halving the life of the battery in terms of miles that can be driven on the road.
Well, maybe. I don't know. I think there have been some you know, there was a thing for a while that doing the bidirectional charging was bad for the battery, that it would really harm the battery life. But then there were some other studies that contradicted that and said, no, it wasn't bad for it. But I guess your point is that anytime you charge and discharge the battery, you're putting miles on it, so to speak. So yeah, I'm not sure about the technical aspects of that, but I know that this is a big topic in the fleet world, so they must figure that it's worth doing that.
Yeah,
And the other thing
I
about
agree with you. That whole commercial thing, I think, is huge, particularly with the Biden administration. You know, a lot of the money that's potentially going in this infrastructure plan is for things like school buses, USPS, you know, other, you know, fleet operations. I think you might be right, and hopefully that will have some impact and raise the visibility on the retail sector.
And another thing about school buses is it's a pretty easy sell when you start talking about kids breathing diesel fumes. You know, I think everybody's against that. So that really is a little extra sweetener. You know, it's like there's one thing to say, well, gee, rich people buying EVs, who cares? But when you say, you know, hey, how about giving our kids a clean ride and they don't have to breathe this smoke anymore? Everybody's on, gee, I guess I'm for that. There's a couple more questions in the chat here. Barbara asks, what will happen to gas vehicles once the public switches? Third world countries usually skip the in-between innovation stage. Sure, in a lot of third world countries, they kind of skipped the phone thing. You know, they went directly to cell phones, and we may see that happening with renewable energy. Certainly in a lot of developing countries, solar energy makes a whole lot of sense. They don't have a extensive grid, so, you know, solar energy can be done off grid. So that's something we may see them skipping the stage of building, you know, coal and gas power plants and going directly to renewable energy. Will they jump directly to electric vehicles and skip the in-between stage? I don't know. I think even in most developing countries, the automobile is pretty firmly established. And as many of you who have traveled probably know, they tend to be even dirtier in those countries. My brother lives in Guatemala, and when I travel there, the buses that are used for public transport are American school buses. I even saw a bus driving around Guatemala that said Pinellas County Schools on the side. And not only that, but they burn this really cheap, nasty gasoline that they mix used oil in it to make it go farther. And it's terribly dirty. So to clean up some of those cars, some of those trucks and cars in the developing countries would be a great thing. That would deliver a lot of bang for the buck. But I don't know. There's one thing which could be kind of a bad thing is there is a long tradition everywhere in the world of when cars in the US or Europe get to the end of their useful life, what we consider their useful life, they get shipped off to poorer countries and run for another 20 years. So if we really want to clean up the air, that's something we need to look at, and that won't do. You know, if everyone in the US replaces their gas cars with EVs and we just send those gas cars all down to Central America, that's not really getting the full emissions reductions that we want to get. So that's definitely an issue. I think I've put everyone to sleep.
Yeah. Hey, Charles, did you ask that question in the chat about Rivian? Apologies if you
about Rivian. Well, Rivian is a very interesting company. They've got a lot of really a lot of attention because that prototype truck and RV and SUV that they came out with were so impressive, and that seems like a pretty serious company. I think everyone's expecting great things from them. The question is what seems to be the holdup on getting them to market, and I'm not sure there is any holdup exactly. I think it's just that the product pipeline for a car is very long. Back in the old days, the car makers used to say 10 years from designing a new vehicle to actually bringing it on the market. 10 years. Well, they do things a lot faster than that nowadays. They don't take that long anymore. Even the legacy automakers are probably doing it in 5 years or something. And Tesla, as we know, does things at lightning speed. Rivian and those other startups, I see them moving pretty fast in historic terms, but it takes a long time.
What do you think about the point of view that the Rivian truck and the SUV was kind of the flagship and was drawing press, but with the Amazon investment, arguably the retail truck has become a sideline, and the real focus is on the delivery side of the business?
Well, that could be. One take on that I recently read was that Rivian is using that Amazon delivery truck as a kind of a cash cow. They're going to crank those out, and because that's already sold, all they got to do is produce those trucks and they get the money. So they're going to use that as a kind of cash cow to bring in the money that allows them to bring their cooler and sexier pickup truck and SUV to market. So I don't know if that's true. We'll see.
But given a finite amount of engineering resource, I mean, the Amazon truck isn't going to magic itself out of the ether. They've got to, there's a significant amount of R&D they've got to put into that, which clearly they can't therefore put into the retail truck.
That's true. And like I said, the delivery truck is kind of guaranteed money in the pocket. So will that sap resources from the consumer-oriented trucks? I don't know. I do know that Rivian made an announcement about their charging network. They're going to do their own proprietary charging network. I don't know whether how successful that's going to be, but I think just the fact that they're throwing that out there indicates that they are moving forward, and they got big plans. So we'll see. I mean, it's kind of like back in the old internet days. There were all these startups that came out, and some of them sounded really great, and some of them went on to become great big giants, and some of them went straight down the tubes. So, and I've seen some companies, especially in that commercial field, have already gone down the tubes. Remember Fisker and A123 and several others I could name. So we'll see. I wish them all well. I'd like them all to do well, and I know that Tesla is happy to welcome them to the party. They're not afraid of some healthy competition, but just from judging from history, some of those companies aren't going to make it.
Charles, if I can speak up for a minute. Last year, drove past the Rivian plant in Normal, Illinois. They had purchased a plant that was a joint venture between Chrysler and Mitsubishi. And there was all kinds of activity around there. They were spending money like it was going out of style. And, all the indications were that the assembly plant was, being ready for production. And, they do have the advantage that there's a workforce there that, was involved with the Chrysler Mitsubishi plant before it closed 5 years ago or so. So I have more confidence that Rivian's going to meet the objectives that they've announced because, they look like they're the real deal. And of course, you know, while they started their engineering in Plymouth, Michigan, they've since moved their headquarters, I think, to Silicon Valley. I think so they can access more of the, you know, the type of people, technology that they need to make the type of electric vehicle that everybody expects after the Tesla experience.
Yeah, well, that's good. Yeah, I like Rivian, and I like Lucid and Proterra. I think those are some of the more promising of the new crop.
Are you with us, Larry? Can we hear you?
I don't know. Can you?
Just
A little
barely.
bit better, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's some people that may actually want to go to dinner.
They can leave anytime they want.
All right. We can keep this going as long as we've got questions.
Well, I'll ask my ongoing question. How about expanding service centers for Tesla? What does that look like?
Well, I've been
Well,
dealing-
yeah, I don't know anything about that. Maybe perhaps someone else could address that.
I've been dealing with service people a little bit. I can't talk to you too much about it, other than saying that, like, I've been promoting the Tallahassee area, to be honest with you. So I've been working behind the scenes, you know, writing letters, so to speak, that can be circulated to the service side, you know, promoting Tallahassee. They obviously need one there. So I've got some positive feedback, but I can't really tell you anything more than that. Just have to see. I also feel that before Jerome was reassigned, he was pretty vocal in trying to find locations for what I call pop-up service centers. So, you know, here where we live here in Sarasota, they had a pop-up service center. They had one in Pensacola, you know, and since then they've got some other legitimate full-size service centers in Fort Myers popping up, and so I feel that they're trying to get their act together. You know, it's that Chinese proverb: "Be careful what you wish for." They did so well in sales, they couldn't keep up with service. So now it's a catch-up game. So we'll just have to.
I've read they're, instead of doing more service centers, they've been trying to push more mobile service. That's what I've been reading for the last year.
Well,
or so.
I think that's to me, that would be a stopgap measure. You need to be able to get, you know, originally Elon did something really stupid. He said he wasn't going to do test drives, but he backed away from that real quick. You can't do test drives with Rangers. You know, you need both service centers, you need delivery centers, and you need stores. And
Yeah, not to do away with them, but just to supplement. Because some services require the dealership, but if you're just changing out an air conditioning filter or something, might be more feasible to do it and rotate tires or something to have a mobile.
Our Rover up here has gone. He's no longer with the company, so.
Right. Well, I pointed that out to them when I was talking about the need for the Tallahassee service center. So there's some areas in particular, the Panhandle is, I believe, I've been telling management that there's a pent-up demand in the Panhandle because people want to be, you know, when they buy first they need a store. There's no store in the Panhandle. So then they need to do test drives, you know, and you usually need a store or at least a service center with a store to do a test drive. They don't have that. And then, of course, if you actually bought the car, you actually need to have service done. And Rangers can only go so far. So I try to explain that to senior management, which they probably already know, but that they need to invest in because it's a 5 or 6 hour drive from, let's say, from Pensacola to Jacksonville in order to go to a service center. That's insane.
That's too far.
So I'm telling them they can sell more cars if they do that. So you got to look for these different opportunities, and I think the Panhandle is a good example of that.
compared
This goes back to the discussion you had before about dealerships. I mean, there's nothing inherently incompatible about dealerships and electric cars. Even though ICE dealerships are not focusing on electric cars, and in fact, plenty of Tesla owners, I think, would be happy if Tesla had more of a dealership model where it would be a lot easier for them to get service and be able to speak with people. So I think there is an opportunity for dealerships to survive. They just need to make the transition to electric vehicles.
Yeah, that's a point. One thing I wasn't aware of until recently is, you need service, you need sales, but you also need delivery. And some of these, like I was explaining about these pop-up service centers, they're not geared for delivery. So like the one here in Sarasota, they can do service, but they need a much bigger infrastructure, larger parking lots and whatnot, secure parking lots to support delivery. They can't do deliveries. So they probably need to rethink what they're doing with these pop-ups. Again, they're stopgap. They need to build bigger service centers that are actually delivery locations as well as sales. So we'll just have to see.
Well, that's what they have in Jacksonville.
Right, and Tampa, obviously, and I think maybe
Orlando.
But it's a big state, so we need a lot more of those.
Well, Larry, you and I talked about this just recently. I'm down in Venice, and I took delivery of both cars in Tampa because that was the closest place. And the pop-up there in Sarasota on McIntosh is admittedly a temporary Band-Aid. Even the manager there said so. And he also, confided that they're actively looking for a location somewhere in the Sarasota or, the area sort of between Tampa and Naples, let's say, that would be all three of those things. It would be delivery, showroom and demonstration, as well as service. Of course, now all they do in Sarasota is they do service, and then the same techs that do the in-house service are also their road warriors, because I actually saw the guy that came to my house to do a service call. The next time I went to the garage, he was in the garage because they didn't need him out on the road that particular day. I'm also familiar with the Michigan situation, and of course, up until March of last year, if you bought a car in Ohio, because you couldn't buy it in Michigan, the closest you could get it serviced was in Toledo. Other than they had mobile service in Michigan, and the technicians interestingly called it the Bat Cave. It was a secret location in Ann Arbor from which they would be dispatched to handle service calls within the state of Michigan. And I take it was technically legal, but it was like unsignposted and no one knew where it was. And then, of course, in January of last year, they announced they had a sort of an accommodation with the state of Michigan. And again, this gets back into the dealers and the NADA and the state franchise laws that specifically had prevented manufacturers from owning or operating dealerships, which still exist in several states. I think Texas is one of them. I think Colorado's still going through some throes there, brought up now by Rivian. Tesla was kind of grandfathered in before the law was changed there. But once they got that change in Michigan, they were able to open up their first service center, which then became a showroom and now is a delivery center as well, in a building in a location that was a previous dealership. And now this month in April, they're opening one in Grand Rapids. They still sort of have this funny thing where the cash has to change hands outside the state of Michigan. The car has to be titled, or somehow possession has to be transferred out of the state of Michigan, and then they can transport it to Michigan for actual handoff to the customer. So it's still kind of in between situation.
Gotta run. Thanks, Charles. Thanks, everyone.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to sign off too, folks. Thanks very much for having me. It was a lot of fun talking with y'all, and special thanks to Larry. And hopefully we'll stay in touch.
Cool. Thanks, Charles.
Yes, thank you
Thanks,
very much.
Charles.
Thank you all very much.
You guys.
Yeah.
Everybody stay safe.